Today, we're going to take the pulse of the US economy. But here's the thing. To really get the full story, we can't just look at what's happening within our borders. We've got to understand the global forces that are pulling the strings, and then look at the official game plan for what might come next. So that leads us to the big question, right? Where is this whole thing headed? Are we looking at clear skies ahead, or should we maybe be bracing for a little bit of turbulence? Let's find out. And to get those answers, we're not just guessing. We're going straight to the source. We've dug into two really important reports, one from the U.S. Treasury on global trade and another from the Federal Reserve on the domestic outlook, to see what the people in charge are actually seeing. All right, first up, the global trade puzzle. You know, the U.S. economy doesn't exist in a vacuum. So let's start with all those international forces that are shaping its future right now. I want to start with a number that just kind of sets the stage. In the year ending in December 2024, the U.S. current account deficit, which is basically the gap between what we buy from the world versus what we sell to them, hit $1.1 trillion. Let that sink in. That is a massive, massive imbalance. And listen, this isn't just some abstract number on a spreadsheet. The Treasury Department itself, in its own report, calls this deficit, and I'm quoting them directly here, unacceptably high and a drag on growth. So yeah, the government sees this as a serious headwind for the economy. So, if this deficit is such a big problem, how does the government keep tabs on the international policies that might be causing it? Well, one of their main tools is something called the Currency Watch List. So, how does a country land on this list? It's pretty straightforward. They have to check at least two of these three boxes. First, are they selling way more stuff to the US than they're buying from us? Second, do they have a big overall trade surplus with the entire world? And third, the really tricky one, are they actively messing with their own currency to make their exports cheaper? And for 2025, here's the list. We've got 9 major economies, from Europe all the way to Asia, that met at least 2 of those criteria. So you can bet the Treasury is watching these countries very, very closely. But the Treasury report calls out one country in particular, China. It's described as an outlier, not just for hitting the technical triggers, but for what the report calls a lack of transparency around its currency. You combine that opacity with a massive $264 billion trade surplus with the US, and yeah, that keeps them firmly on the watch list. Okay, so that's all the pressure from the outside. With all those global headwinds we just talked about, you might expect a pretty gloomy forecast for the economy here at home, right? But what does the Federal Reserve actually predict? Well, according to the Fed's own projections, the outlook is actually for steady, consistent growth. If you look at the median forecast from Fed officials, they see the economy growing at a pretty solid 2.3% in 2026. Not a crazy boom, but stable. The jobs picture looks pretty bright too. The Fed is projecting the unemployment rate will stay really low, settling in at just 4.4% in 2026. That points to continued strength and a lot of stability in the labor market. And what about prices? The thing we all feel in our wallets? The forecast shows inflation continuing to cool off, with the median projection for 2026 sitting at 2.4%. That's moving steadily down towards the Fed's long-term goal of 2%. So the bottom line is, the official domestic forecast is surprisingly optimistic. But these projections, they aren't just wishful thinking. They're actually based on a very specific strategy from the folks managing the economy, the Federal Reserve. And this chart, this gives us a fascinating peek inside their heads. It's the famous dot plot. Each one of those little dots is one Fed official's anonymous prediction for where interest rates are headed. And even though there's a range of opinions, the overall trend is pretty clear. They expect rates to come down over the next couple of years. So why do we care about their target rate? Because the federal funds rate, well, it's kind of the bedrock of our entire financial system. It directly impacts the interest rates you pay on your credit card, your car loan, your mortgage. It's the master lever for making it cheaper or more expensive for all of us to borrow money. But here's the reality check. Even the people with the master plan, with all the data in the world, they know that the future is never, ever a sure thing. Now, this is probably one of the most honest charts you'll ever see from a central bank. It's called a fan chart. That solid red line in the middle, that's their best guess for inflation. But that gray cone around it, that's the key. That's the range of what could probably happen. And notice how it gets wider and wider over time. That's the Fed basically admitting, hey, the further out we look, the foggier our crystal ball gets. Which brings us right back to where we started. On one side, you've got these serious global pressures, like that massive trade deficit. But on the other, you have this optimistic domestic plan for a soft landing. So the real question is, which force is going to win out? Are we headed for a smooth touchdown, or should we all be buckling up for some more turbulence?